In section 3, we'll take a look at questions number 4 and question number 5. First, question number 4, we have a labor supply and demand relationship of labor demand at 75 minus 6W being equal to labor supply at negative 10 plus 4W. And I simply ask to begin with that we show the market clearing wage and quantity of labor for this market. Note here that W equals an hourly wage and L equals workers in hundreds. That doesn't mean that it changes W star or L star. It just means if we want to talk about number of workers, it's L times 100. So here we set labor supply and demand equal to each other, such that we have 75 minus 6W being equal to negative 10 plus 4W. And we end up at a W star of 8.50. We take that W star and plug it into the labor equation. Whether it's supply or demand, it's irrelevant. And we end up at a L star of 24. We see this on the graph in item B, where I've asked you to give me a properly labeled and appropriately articulated labor market model for this market. And in this case, we'll discuss this without talking about this other labor demand equation here, because that is a function of the question over here in part D. So we'll come back to that in a few moments. But here we find that when we identify our intercepts, the labor demand equation is coming through the labor or x-axis at 75, the wage or y-axis at 12.5. The labor supply equation is coming through the y or wage axis at 2.5, and we see our W star and our L star creating our point of equilibrium. And so this then is our supply, this is our demand. It's in the labor market, or labor with labor and wage and supply and demand. So that's what I'm looking for. Then I say, okay, suppose BJSG Ribs enters the market as a new employer such that labor demand increases to 90 minus 5W. So if labor demand is increasing, you might suppose immediately that it's shifting out and to the right, which it will do in a moment. And so I ask you, how many workers might this new firm be able to employ, and at what wage would they pay them? Remember, the existing employers are employing 24 people, and we're told here that those employers do not experience a change in the number of workers. So they're going to continue to employ 24 people even after this labor-demand relationship changes. So we can set the existing labor supply equation equal to the new labor demand, such that we have negative 10 plus 4W equals 90 minus 5W, such that we end up with W prime. I say prime here to differentiate it from W star at 11.11. Plug that into either equation, and we have L star or L prime at 34.44. If 24 workers are already employed by the existing employers, then that left 10.44 workers for BJSG Ribs. So I've asked you to go ahead and show this new demand equation or relation on the graphic in the part A. Here we'll go ahead and identify the intercepts. So when W is equal to 0, the demand relationship will cross the L or the x-axis at 90, and when L is 0, it crosses the W or the y-axis at 18, exactly as I'm showing here. And we see the new equilibria of 11.11 and 34.44. I then asked for you to go ahead and give the initial level of labor demand elasticity and show how as it differs from that suggested by the new demand curve. And I can tell you that you can use a $1 change in wage to motivate this. So to do this, you're going to have to create an elasticity both for the initial labor demand relation and for the new labor demand relation. And we are going to be able to think about a $1 change in wage. We start with a wage of W star or W1 at 8.5, which we know when that was the case, L was 24. If we increase that from 8.5 to 9.5, then our labor goes down from 24 to 18. So W1, W2, L1, L2, we put it into the simple equation such that we have L1 or L2 minus L1 divided by L1, all of that divided by W2 minus W1 divided by W1, such that we end up with a elasticity of negative 2.25 or negative 2.25. So that's elastic. It's greater than the absolute value of negative 1, and that's at the initial labor demand elasticity, the labor demand relation. So if we now go ahead and think about the new labor demand relation, we're at 95 minus, 5W. We can then use for W1 what we found is W prime for that new equilibrium. And L prime was at 34.44. We have a $1 increase in wage that takes us to 12.11. And now we then have a new L that takes us down to 29.45. We put those values all into the elasticity relationship, and we end up with a elasticity of negative 1.6097 or 1.61. Again, greater than the absolute value of negative 1, a little bit less so than originally, and so we can say that even though this is still elastic, it's not quite as elastic as it had been, which makes sense to us because these workers are now going to be paid more. And so we might expect that being able to pay them more, we would identify perhaps a stronger, more productive worker, worth more money, slightly more inelastic. So for item number 5, question number 5, we have essentially the same market structure in front of us, where demand is 75 minus 6W, supply is negative 10 plus 4W. We have the exact same market clearing levels of W star at 8.5 and L star at 24.5, gotten the exact same way. And in fact, we see that we have the exact same structure in the market to begin with, at least. You're not going to have that second demand equation coming through here. That's not part of this question. But we have the same labor supply, same labor demand, same intercepts, same equilibria. And so this really looks all but identical to the market model we saw a few moments ago as far as this initial question is asking for us. Now we're going to get to a point where we want to think about a change in wage, some exogenous change in wage, maybe a minimum wage comes in at $10, but that'll happen in a moment. So now we have to say, okay, fine, the state of Idaho increases the minimum wage $10. What is that going to do? How many workers would firms in this region choose to employ? Well, the supply relationship didn't change. That's still the same, but we have an imposed wage. So we're going to take that newly imposed wage and we're going to intersect it with the demand relationship and with the supply relationship to identify how many workers will be demanded at that wage, how many workers will be supplied. You're going to see that it's 15 and 30. Well, when supply is greater than demand, we have some friction, of course. In this case, friction seen in unemployment because of this imposed wage above W star. And so we can say there'd be 15 workers employed in the market. 30 people would like to be, but firms only wanted 15 of them because that's the number of workers demanded at that wage. So we've gone ahead and shown all of this in the graph in part B, so we can see both the W prime here at 10. We can telegraph over and see where it intersects the demand curve, supply curve. That gives us these values. You might be able to think now about employer surplus and worker surplus and deadweight loss. So there's some things to consider here. And then I ask you finally, what do the results you presented in Part D tell us about the possible productivity of the workers? So I didn't ask you about employer surplus and worker surplus. That was asked in the first question in Section 1. But here we're wanting to know about the productivity of the workers. Well, I've said here that, higher expected productivity because we have a higher wage being paid to them. So we can be more selective in these employees. We can expect people with greater skills, greater disciplines, etc. Absent an increase in the price of the output good, the marginal product would similarly rise. Greater productivity leading to supporting the greater wage. And then we might say something about policymakers must believe that firms are taking advantage of current productivity levels in order for them to support these wage increases. Just like a couple of these other questions, any reasonable argument that you gave me here that was fleshed out nicely, I gave you then full points. By the way, item E on this question and item E on this question were each worth 10 points because you could have done rather a lot with these. All the other questions in the exam were worth 5 points. And that's how we finish up this exam.